naughty tens had Brené Brown telling us all to be brave. The naughties had Tony Robbins walking on hot coals.
I didn't like that.
No, that was way too much
He
like
was
Hardwick.
also very...
I know people who did it, though.
He
I know
was-
people who did
He
it.
was very
Quite
tall
bouncy.
and
Yeah.
deep voice.
Quite
and-
loud.
Yeah.
The 90s had John Gray with his Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus
I
thing.
liked that.
I know you did.
I thought that was great.
Mia and I, this is one of the divisions in our
Yeah.
relationship.
Mia's such a basic bitch. She's just
Oh,
like,
I love
yeah.
Men Are From Mars. I still talk about that a lot, that book.
And of course, all the decades, mostly Oprah. Every era has its zeitgeist self-help guru. And 2025 has unequivocally crowned Mel Robbins, yes, of Let Them fame. More about Let Them in a moment. Robbins' podcast is currently the #1 in Australia, which we're not at all bitter about because we're #3. Robbins is huge. She's been doing this for a while. So she has been a life coach and a motivational speaker for over a decade. And until this massive breakthrough moment, she'd built an empire from kind of really down home, like kind of like your grandma would have told you this advice. So
She was quite bossy. Like, I've been
She is
following
bossy.
her for probably more than 5 years. And I found her to be, she had a TED Talk that went viral.
About the 5-second rule, procrastination.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's got a really great backstory, which we'll get to in a second, a good origin story. And she's very sort of no nonsense.
So she's like, jump out of bed in the morning and
Yeah.
get outside. Don't procrastinate. That's the 5-second rule. Think positively all the time. She's like, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Like that kind of stuff. A short walk solves most problems, make everyone else's day a little bit better. So very like solid, white bready
Basic.
kind of.
She's
yeah.
not woo-woo.
She's not woo-woo. She's sold millions of books. She's had billions of podcast streams. A little tiny bit about her origin story before we get into the Let Them phenomena, because every guru needs one. Robbins is self-reinvention. At 41, she was unemployed. She'd gone broke from a failed business venture that left her and her husband with $800,000 in debt. She says that she was miserable and unhappy. She said, my past was full of shitty behavior. I used to be a real competitive, insecure asshole, and I hurt people and blah, 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 right? Jessie, I don't know how to tell you this next bit because you're not going to like it. But before she was a life coach and a motivational speaker, she was a criminal lawyer and she was unhappy and dissatisfied. So she's got a law degree. She was working as a criminal lawyer. She went to a life coach to say, what should I do with my life? I'm unhappy and dissatisfied. The life coach told her she should be a life coach.
no.
There we
And
go.
so she launched.
And so it begins.
and she
And it never
launched
ends.
her 2 self-help companies and quickly earned this reputation as a tough love personal improvement coach. Mia, why is this Mel Robbins' moment?
I think the news cycle has never been more intense than it's been sort of these past 18 months between war and Trump and algorithms and everyone's just feeling very besieged. And what the Let Them theory is, and Let Them is about recognizing things you can't control, essentially. It's about, if your friends, if someone's not dating you and they're not interested, let them not be interested. If your partner wants to end the relationship, let them. If your kid hasn't taken his lunch to school again, let them be hungry. And it's that idea of personal empowerment, but in a very passive way. So what she's actually doing, I think everyone's so tired. Remember Sheryl Sandberg, who was another bit of a self-help guru, that was all about lean in. That was the girl boss era and that was hustle culture. Mel Robbins and Let Them is about lie down. It's
And
about
it's
stop
do
trying to
less,
change
yeah.
people, stop trying to change things, stop trying to control every outcome, just accept what you can't change about others, like the Serenity Prayer, and work on what you can change and what you can do. And I think that there's something really appealing about that. It's also short, it's simple. Her advice is not, as I said, it's not woo-woo. It's not like soul food. It doesn't require a lot of self-reflection. It's very practical.
In fact, she doesn't really like self-reflection much. Jessie, why do you think we're so addicted to being told what to do?
I reckon we all feel woefully unqualified to make any decisions about our own lives. And I actually don't think that's entirely new. I was thinking about how my grandmother would have gone to her priest. And over the weekend, we were at synagogue. Mia was speaking, and a rabbi was on the panel, and I thought, I would love an hour with a rabbi to just really corner her and go, I've got some
very
issues.
wise.
Can you solve them? And this is still, I mean, all over the world, there are lots of religious people who turn to, a monk or an imam or a rabbi or a priest to help them. And I think that Mel Robbins has actually used a few techniques and language that mirrors this. So, for example, she often says, I just happen to be the messenger. I just happen to be the messenger of this, which is very, very Jesus. And she has this email that she sends out, and she says, in case nobody else tells you today, let me be the first to say that I love you and I believe in you and your ability to create a better life. Unconditional love is the bedrock.
Nice.
Yes, but this is, I think that as religion, the demise of religion has left a wide open hole.
And we filled it with celebrities for a little while, didn't we?
Yeah, but I think that there's still this sense of, I don't know what to do. I don't know. I was reading a few interviews with people who said, this sounds weird, but I feel like she has my back. And when I've spoken to people who are very religious, the thing I'm most envious of is they say, I feel like someone's watching out for me, like someone has some greater plan. Like Mel Robbins will often say, the universe has a plan, blah, blah, blah. And so I think there's an element of that. But what I guess the question I would ask is that when you have religious people, say the priest, answer you or you go to them with a crisis, they have a methodology. They have centuries of texts and conversations and ethics and values that inform their answer. If you go to a psychologist, they have a methodology which is research-based evidence. My worry about certain gurus is when you go, what's your methodology? Other than what sounds right and what feels right
and what's
going to
go viral.
And what's going to go viral, how do we know to trust you, because where's this information coming from?
What Mel Robbins is, and all of those people that I listed at the beginning they're just very good communicators, right? Because Mel Robbins is obviously smart. She's obviously smart and she's obviously experienced in this field. But what she's saying, and she says this herself, like I've been listening to her, I was listening to her quite a lot the other day on a long drive, and she'll say herself, this is all stuff your grandmother would have told you if you'd have had the kind of grandmother who tells you things, which in itself tells you something about the way our families are now. She said, I'm going to tell you in simple terms and then I'm going to give you a trick to remember it. It's not that she's come up with all these brilliant ideas necessarily, but she's very good at packaging them and she's very good at communicating, and that's the key. But there is the thing that's interesting about it is that Mel Robbins, and this isn't criticism of her, like I find her advice very interesting and helpful in lots of ways, but she doesn't really have your back, guys. She's just making a lot of money. That's what she's doing. Not in a nefarious way. She's selling a product that people need and want, because I think Mia's absolutely spot on when she's like, our lives feel out of control. Everything feels out of control. Even the most ordinary life has a lot of problems in it. We all have a lot of problems.
It's overwhelming being a human in 2025.
And the thing that self-help over the decades that it's established itself as being very mainstream has convinced us of is that we can solve them. If only we tried harder, if only we got up earlier, if only we did whatever, then we can solve them. It's up to us. She's the same vein as all that. She's just packaged it a bit differently. It's interesting because she even starts her podcast by saying, hi, it's your friend Mel here. And it's like, I find that a tiny bit. But maybe that's also because I'm not American, that I find it a tiny bit.
She's very American.
I can see through. I can see through it,
It's also that therapy speak and psychobabble and all of that has gone, it's ubiquitous everywhere at the moment. And the rise of that has not dovetailed with a rise in accessibility. So everyone thinks they need a therapist, but most people can't afford one. So Mel Robbins...
Or know how to go about even getting one.
No. So Mel Robbins can be your therapist for free. But on she's trying to sell you something, I do wonder, and I listen to a lot of her advice, I don't think she is the same as the other gurus, because I look at Brene Brown, who had decades of expertise and academia and studies, and she was saying something grounded in science.
And she is still around, by the way.
And she's still around in a way that Mel Robbins, what she's saying isn't necessarily grounded in science, or at least doesn't show us her working out. But she started as a business coach, and I think that might be a clue to what her values
That's
are.
how you've just made me realise that's how I found her. I was starting to look at, around when I was doing Lady Startup, and I started to look at some of the other women in that space. This is probably more than 5 years ago now. And that's when I found her. And it was about business, and it was about content creation and reaching an audience and doing all of those things.
Is that a clue to what data or methodology she's bringing to her advice? Is her background and is her value system capitalism? Like, is that it? Because a lot
Jessie, everyone's value system is capitalism.
well, some of us are at least trying to resist. But I wonder if not so great. Because a lot of her advice is very, very individualistic. It's very, if you help yourself, you'll help others.
Yeah. And
it's not systemic. It's not institutional.
No. Yeah.
It's one thing
it's about accountability.
It's about accountability
and responsibility, taking responsibility for yourself.
One thing I think we've probably got to acknowledge is that a lot of the people who have reported on her and done features and gone and listened to her speak is, wow, that's a lot of white women. I'm not saying that white women don't have problems or that they're not a legitimate market, but the fact that there is a sort of homogenous market for her, I think, says something about what the problems of the white woman is. And maybe it's that if you can feed your family and if you feel safe and if you're a middle-class woman in America, then you worry about X, Y, and Z.
I don't know about that.
What do you think?
You're not wrong about who her audience is, but I think as I was saying before, every life is very complex.
Absolutely.
You only have to scratch the tiny surface of see that what people are actually going through in terms of illness and divorce and money struggles and estrangement from family members and addiction issues. Like that applies to all of those people.
Why do you think she appeals? Is it as simple as she's a white woman? So she looks like the women.
I think she's very palatable and packageable. She's like, blonde and attractive. Yeah. But I just think she's a really good communicator. I think that what she said.
I do too.
And I think that meeting her moment thing, I think Mia's nails it about the let them and the uncontrollable moment. But also what's interesting is she's apolitical, right? I've listened to a lot of interviews with her, and she can have a bit of a snipe about Trump, but she's smart enough to know that that's a lot of her market. So she's she's talking to sort of every woman in a way, like every woman, I'm sure, as you say, there's definitely a demographic there, but she's not alienating anyone. She's not making everything political. It's kind of like a mix of, this is quite soothing to listen to. And also you end up listening to her and you're like, yes, I am going to get up at 6:00. Yes, I am going to talk to myself in the mirror like somebody who likes themselves and all those things.
Yeah.
So two of her other philosophies, in addition to let them, one is the high five trick, and it's every morning you get up, you brush your teeth, and you look in the mirror and you give yourself a high five. But her point is that we are programmed to, when you give a high five gesture, you are positive, you are active, you are all of those things, and you can't, by doing that, you can't not be. So it almost tricks you no matter how bad you're feeling. The other one is the 5-second rule for stopping procrastination, and that is to literally say to yourself, I'm going to count down from 5 to 0, and when I get to 0, I'm going to do it, whether it's getting up out of bed, answering an email, calling someone you don't want to speak to.
But going back to the gap that's been left, and to be clear, when I talk about my nan going to the priest, he was always a man, and there are so many limitations and issues with you go
with their own agenda too,
with their own agenda.
And didn't he pretty much, the answer was always say Hail Marys and go back and look after your children?
Not necessarily.
Like, what does he know of her life?
Well, not necessarily of someone's life, but I'm thinking even about the rabbi, is they have these scriptures and these books, and underpinning a lot of it was this sense of community and social cohesion. A lot of what...
Or it's your fault.
Or it's your fault, and let's not forget the homophobia and the sexism and all of that, and putting that to the side for a minute. Mel Robbins, I mean, high-fiving the mirror isn't going to change the world.
But it's not trying to. That's what self-help is. Self-help isn't about helping other people, and I think that's another reason why she's met the moment. I think that two things. For the last few years, we've seen a real rise in victim culture. where whoever's got the biggest hardship wins. And there's a real sense of your wounds are your evidence, or is the greatest, most important part of you. Your wounds bring status. Your disadvantages bring status. She's very much the opposite of that. She's very much like, there's nothing to be said for wallowing. There's strength in making change. And you can't change systemic inequality. You can't change the economy.
No, you can.
I think that's a palatable message
as an
for
individual.
a rich,
as an individual, you can't.
You can
but
do
what you
things
can
every
do
day.
is get out of bed in the morning, high five yourself, and feel better. And we know that the key to making any positive change, whether it's outside your life or inside your life, is feeling good. If you feel miserable and your self-esteem is low and you're procrastinating, you're of no good to anyone, including the world.
That's true, but I think that there's a difference between Brene Brown, right, was all about vulnerability and connection. Interestingly, is Mel Robbins, because in saying let them, there's a bit of siloing there, which is sort of like, I'm going to do my thing. And I listened to a bunch of Mel Robbins in preparation for this, and I like her. I'm not trying to – I've just got some questions about what she says. She uses the word winning a lot. And like, you are going to be the winner, and the past you would have been a loser, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and
interesting.
I'm just a little bit allergic to the individualism of her
But that's
approach.
what self-help is.
But I understand exactly what you mean, though, Jessie, because although I'm all for, I'm a big believer that a short walk solves every problem and getting out of bed, blah, blah. But it is true that it's not going to solve all the problems in the world. The pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just toughen up and get on with it, really isn't helpful in lots of situations. But it is helpful in some small situations. And I think that Mia's right, that what we're talking about here and what Mel Robbins is addressing is, what can you control? What's in your circle of influence? Now, I disagree that I don't think that means you shouldn't be thinking about inequality, and I don't think that means you shouldn't be thinking about how do I make a difference to the world. I think that that's a very important thing to be thinking about. But in terms of you and your world, that's where Mel Robbins has some answers for you. And whether or not she's about connection, she does talk about it. She does talk about, I've listened to some of her podcasts where she's like, obviously it's great to be rich and successful and all those things, but she's like, but do you want to be standing on the top of the mountain alone? Really, we're all about our people around us. Really, those messages are all quite similar in the end.